Whitebeard says, happy Majority Thursday, my favorite day. So now that numerous investigations have confirmed, and thank you for saying that. So now that numerous investigations have confirmed an Israeli sniper intentionally killed Shireen Abu Akleh, will all of these politicians who initially called for investigations criticize her killers and demand Israel be held accountable? Passage, a Canadian publication, asked 17 members of parliament who called for investigations to follow up. Only one replied, and none of the rest have said anything on the matter since, including our foreign affairs minister. What a surprise. Yeah, I mean, wasn't it Ned Price just saying, like, we're going to wait until there's an independent investigation to make a determination? No, we know now. We know. So, hello? Like, are there any response? Anything that's going to happen to our unconditional support of Israel?
Yeah, and it was the same thing kind of in multiple, press conferences between AP diplomatic writer Matt Lee and Ned Price.
Matt Lee is Ned Price's worst nightmare.
Where like Lee was like, You essentially accept every single judgment from the International Criminal Court except for ones involving Israel and Palestine. Why is that? And they're like, and Price was like, Matt, like we evaluate everyone on its merits. It's like, oh, interesting. Seemingly every single claim from the ICC is meritocratic except for everyone that involves Israel.
Right.
Yeah, they're just trying to outweigh the public. They're trying to outweigh the public's attention span when it comes to this issue, so that they don't have to situate this particular, human rights violation, war crime that Israel committed into like the larger pattern of other war crimes and other human rights violations that they commit, consistently, obviously, that they can just, in the future, when people reference it, you just treat it like it's an anomaly so that you don't have to like treat it, basically as what it is, another in a long line of continued violence against the Palestinian people, and also continued violence against people who try to expose the violent regime that Palestinian people are currently being subjected to by Israeli occupation.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that they're trying to wait out public opinion. And the thing is that they're right to do that from their perspective. No one's talking about Shireen Abu Akleh anymore. And there doesn't seem like there's going to be any consequence. And there won't be.
I mean, we're experiencing the same thing with Saudi Arabia right now, where they're like, oh, we're just going to, you can deal with the oil price. It's like, well, we have leverage over you too. And we just won't exercise it because a certain part of American leadership agrees with the sort of projects of Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia responsible for murdering a journalist, even more in more of a direct way, because it was at it was MBS's directive. But the Saudi Arabia and Israel have both committed countless human rights violations, and it's not like some of the. I understand why the murder of journalists in particular is a hook for people in terms of like, how can we hold Israel or Saudi Arabia accountable? But it's everything else that's even more problematic. What Saudi Arabia's human rights violations, its blockade in Yemen, and in Israel, support of terrorism that attacked us. And in Israel, of course, it's the apartheid and the subjugation of Palestinians. So I feel like I wish those twin instances of Jamal Khashoggi and Shireen Abu Akleh were more of initial the beginnings of conversations about the larger issues with each of those governments.
No, I agree. And I think, honestly, we have to reckon with the fact that what draws people's attention to the, at this point, at least in our society, to the murder of these journalists is oftentimes they're what finally shocks the journalists who cover these countries.
Yes.
The fact that not that there is a consistent human rights abuse regime in both places, Saudi Arabia and Israel, but that might eventually implicate people who, like them, are journalists. And that's not to say that we should start executing journalists who we don't like, but it is to say that I think that they are the journalists who cover these places and in some ways act to normalize the violent regimes that go there. They are expecting that people will be able to carve out an exception for them, the journalists, like when the Washington Post reporters who act to normalize violence in Saudi Arabia, or who act that's like the institutional level to normalize violence against populations here, they act surprised that the readers and the public might not be as shocked and aghast that journalists were killed too. It's like, because we've been working at the highest levels to normalize violence against people who get uppity, and journalists are just another part of that population. And so I think journalists have to take a little bit more seriously, maybe more so, as they cover these things, that if you continue to normalize the violence against normal people, eventually, violence against journalists will be normalized as a consequence of them also just being people.
I mean, Israel just murdered and killed a young boy in Palestine, and I still feel like the outrage over them intentionally seemingly targeting that building last year that housed, was it the Associated Press? Or a major outlet in,
I think it was AP or Al Jazeera.
It was Al Jazeera, right. Well, either of those, and I feel like they're still. It just seems insane to me, given the dynamic that you described, Brandon, about how this is like where journalists, they feel the outrage about this kind of more acutely because it's naturally their profession, but like that should have been even more of a story.
I don't think I will say you can't paint broad brushes about all journalists. Obviously, I was speaking specifically about a certain subset of U.S. journalists who seem to take violence against their own, not even just violence, but any kind of inconvenience against their own media subclass as some sort of especially egregious offense. And, I think when we talk about like what we need for a sustainable, informed society, that is a free press. But I think what a lot of them are forgetting is that they aren't currently a free press. They are currently, at least at the institutional level, operating as mouthpiece for, military industrial complexes, mouthpieces for various types of like Washington special interest groups who act to strip away our rights. And then to suddenly expect, the population to just be on board with on the same page about like the specific violence against journalists as like this, that's what we need to be really concerned about. I think, it's unrealistic to spend a lot of time making excuses for violence against specialized groups only to expect people to be able to determine the difference. And, when they hear the same excuses made about why it's okay to target journalists.